Hello, and welcome back to our final session of today. And we are going to be coming back with our panel discussion. And so, again, just a big thank you to MQA and Family and Music, who are both represented on this panel for supporting this track. And I'm going to hand over to Mike Jbara, the CEO of MQA, who is the consummate chair professional. And I am sure you will enjoy this session. Over to you, Mike.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks for having us. And I'm really grateful for having Kevin, Nadia, and Susan join the panel. Should be a fun conversation. For the audience, you can all read a little bit more about the panelists, check out the agenda, the description, and then you're going to hear them talk about their day jobs to some extent as we get into the questions and the discussion. So we'll try to jump right into it. I first wanted to pick up on some of the great stuff that was covered in the two previous components, both the interview with Hartwig and the great presentation from Sonia. I think for those who didn't get a chance to catch it, I'll summarize a few things. One is music is central to people's lives, and the data that AudienceNet presented, I think, reinforced that. And the generations that the industry is speaking to are quite open-minded about how they do things and creative. So what I take from that is we shouldn't assume traditional constructs or methods are necessarily burned into everybody's conscious as the way that they need to do things. And as the data pointed out, the Gen Z creator economy has really turned things upside down. People feel like they can have sustainable careers being influencers, and probably their grandparents would have no idea what they're discussing when they talk about, no, I'm getting paid just fine. Hartwig covered a lot of stuff that we're going to hit today around artist fairness, diversity, environmental and transparency issues. So with that, I think there's a way of just giving the audience an idea of what do we mean? What are we really trying to do here by saying values should be part of a company's and a brand's identity and an artist's identity? In fact, 70% of consumers say it influences the choices they make about brands. I wonder if I could just go out to the panelists, and not that it's word association, but maybe give me an example of a company who you think has put their values out as part of their brand's equity and is having a positive impact on the market. And maybe, if you don't mind, Susan, I'll turn to you first. Who comes to mind outside of our traditional industry, maybe outside of Sony, that you think has done it well?
Well, that's interesting because the example that I thought about actually is Sony. It's been an interesting path. I have started out at Sony. I started my career at Sony after growing up in a family of creatives and people on the business side, and I was at Sony for a number of years, about 15 years or so, and left and did financial and ops roles at other entertainment companies, and came back to Sony now because of this amazing role, focusing on the artists and helping them through their journey and sort of paying attention to what is actually needed out there. So I've looked at this as an amazing opportunity for someone like myself to see the changes over time, as I've grown up in this business, and see what's happening for artists, and that the focus is really on them. So, I mean, I have to say Sony's had these core values for many years, and they've had an established track record of putting artists first, but we're really now focusing on the importance of transparency and implementing that in all that we do, and recognizing what artists are looking for, that they want, expanded, opportunities, and people who are prioritizing their well-being, and partners who can, sort of help them make sense of all the data that's available in this, ever-changing, rapidly changing, digitally driven environment.
Okay, so I'm going to, in a minute, come back to you and ask you to drill down on that a little bit and hear what does that mean in terms of day-to-day. Kevin, what comes to mind for you? People that have taken social values and impact and turned that into competitive advantage, or at least opportunity in the market.
Well, I'm going to make a blatant plug for my wife's business, the Shine. Caroline's, I'm sure, Nadia, you've met Caroline. She's built a business on fairness, equality, and diversity, and it's proved to be more, a winning formula for her, and that's starting as a company from scratch. So it's not a company that's kind of come in at the end and stuck this on top to make it look good. It's a company that is built up from that, and I've always watched with envy and awe the way that she's kind of built this company, and a really good company, not just stuck it on for the.
And Kevin, repeat the company's name. I just want to give a shout out there.
tinyawards.com. It's around creators, particularly in the kind of film and new director world.
Wonderful. Nadia, how about you? What comes to mind?
Yeah, I think, diversity has definitely been a hot topic in the industry and become a priority for many, or spoken as a priority for many since 2020. And I think it's been really good to see those insights as well from AudienceNet to kind of relay the new generation coming through, and people that are working now in the music industry expect more. They want that care for mental health. We're talking about caring about social issues, and also really making sure that those messages are communicated authentically and carried out authentically within organizations as well. I wanted to give some examples of some good practice in the music industry and progress that I've seen. I particularly work with women's issues in the industry. When I talk about diversity, I think it's important that we also establish that we have to realize that there are multiple diversity characteristics, so women of color or disabled women, and that they suffer even more further barriers. So when I talk on diversity, I do look at it with an intersectional lens. In 2020, I published a report for Women in Control called Seat at the Table. And within that, I looked at the representation of women in UK music trade bodies as a starting point, specifically in the senior levels and in the boardroom. And it was a worrying sight, the statistics, when I actually published the report. But in a positive story, I did publish a follow-up report in 2021 to progress and see, what had happened and what has actually changed in the industry, and were these statements performative, and has action actually been taken. And the representation of women sitting on boards went from 34% in 2020 to 42% in 2021. Not anywhere near equal, but that's obviously an average across all of the trade bodies. The lowest representation of women was PPL in 2020, who had 6% of women on their boards, which was equivalent of 1 woman out of 16 seats. They've now increased that representation to 31%, with 6 women holding board seats. Again, it's a big step up. With boardrooms, you're talking about governance and rules that are limiting how much change they can make. But it's been really promising for me to see those changes. Across the UK music trade bodies, there was only 1 female chair. And in 2021, there were 3 female chairs sitting across the music trade bodies, myself being one of them. After seeing the results, I felt that it was important that I put myself forward to be chair, to be part of representation and being the change that I want to see in the industry. I also did an intersectional focus within the report on Black women, and only 3% of all the board seats, which was the equivalent of 5 Black women, held board seats out of 185 possible board seats across the UK music trade bodies. In 2021, that number did double to 6%, but I mean, that's still really highly underrepresentation, and there's not good enough progress. I do want to kind of, talk about some good practices that I've seen from some organizations. When I talked about some of these numbers there.
Can I ask you a quick question on that, Nadia? I'm sorry to interrupt. In the work that you've done, the research, do you see structural barriers that we should all be trying to address that are contributing to those small numbers?
Yeah, of course. 100%. The music industry, does affect and discriminate, and there's been against women of color, anybody from social disadvantaged backgrounds. All of those, impact on kind of people's entry into the industry, and definitely succession through the industry as well to senior levels. So, I think it's been, the structural barriers are there and they're still existing. I'm looking into organizations. I work with a lot of these organizations, and talking about, your membership. Is your membership diverse? No. Why not? Well, is your leadership diverse? Is your leadership diverse? No. So that kind of feeds into, why there's a lack of representation across those companies. There is structural issues because they have governance rules, like I said. So, some people can sit on boards for 15 to 35 for 50 years, and we have to talk about succession, we have to talk about mentoring, we have to talk about bringing the next generation through. And if you're talking about gaps in knowledge or anything, we need to provide that information and knowledge and be prepared to bring the next generation through.
When I interrupted you, you were going to give some great examples of best practices. So go ahead. I'm sorry to.
Yeah, no, I was just saying that, the report obviously does averages. I do look at specific numbers for individual organizations, but I think, PPL have done an incredible job with the, Peter Latham really kind of taking charge and saying, I'm going to go and find women and get them onto the board. I've actively run a campaign for Hannah Joseph to get elected at the end of 2021. And there were 2 seats. Both were being taken up by male candidates who were rerunning. And she went for as the 3rd candidate, and she got the top amount of votes. So again, I can see progression and change happening in the industry, but there has to be the willingness for the organization leaders to want that change. Ivers Academy, again, when I published the initial report, they really called me straight away, took it and said, well, we're going to make positive action and we're going to make change happen. And they have. And now they've got a diverse and representative board, which I think is going to, help to kind of feed into those decisions when they're talking about the Ivor Novello Awards and eligibility criteria, AIM and MMF as well. I think just good practices of actually kind of engaging with the community and just kind of making people feel more included to be part of the membership and making it more relevant. So I do see change happening across the industry, but it is slow. It's a slow process.
Kevin, you wanted to contribute something on this, I think.
Yeah, and I think obviously change at an upper level when is incredibly important. But I think that I've spent most of my life working in startup. In fact, I say everything I've ever done has been a startup. But because we need to see change bolted into new companies birthing, and not just on the exchanging of people's roles at the top once these companies have become massive. And it is extreme. It's very hard as a startup. We don't have that exchange capability. You're always trying to hire from, what is sometimes a minimal set of opportunities to hire people that fit best. And the stresses and it's incredibly hard. We don't have that interchangeability. We don't have a choice of voting people in or voting people out. So, it's very, very, it is changing. And there are some good examples for a different day, but like trying to hire, you can hire diversity, but in the tech world, most CTOs are guys, obviously not all. It's very hard to hire in that sector and diversity. And it is possible, but it's harder, but we need to see it bolted in from companies starting, not just, exchanging people on boards. We need to see people growing in, CTOs, CFOs, COOs, all coming from diverse worlds, and get it bolted into changing culture. And it is happening, but I still, And
I think for folks that are thinking about this out there are resources available to help you. MQA is an engineering-centered organization based in the UK, which means we have a lot of off-university campuses, STEM skills coming our way. And without attention to it, you can become quickly largely male just because of people coming through university. And we joined the WISE organization, WISE campaign in the UK, which is both a great group focused on female representation in STEM careers, but it's a great source of best practices and networking. So I think, now you've probably either come across them or done work with them, and I'm sure you have similar resources available, but we do encourage folks to look out and look for help, not try to reinvent this internally if they haven't begun yet. That's great, and we will come back to it. I want to go a little bit further with you, Kevin, because the topic that Hartwig touched on, which was a different kind of artist model, and artist services certainly is a term that we've now had for at least a decade inside of the industry. You've recently launched inside of Family Magenta. I think you announced it relatively recently, and I think it's part of a portfolio of artist capabilities that you support. I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit more and describe what your mission is with the tools and with the company.
Yeah, well, I think there's one conclusion, and I've kind of spread it around, so it's not new to a lot of people. But I still say that whilst technology's been great for the industry, it's been pretty shit for the creator when it comes to getting paid, and none more so than the writer. And in fact, in the very early days of AWOL, way before, years before, well, at the very beginning, we were sent this device which we could help load our songs up to the DSPs. And there was no room for the producer, which hurt me, being a producer, and no room for the writers. And I really couldn't believe it. And I was thinking, is this right? Can we be creative? Is this right? And I should have stood up and been louder and shouted and made a fuss. But that's the way that it went. And technology, and there's often this gigantic mix match between music companies that think they're going into the tech space and tech companies going into the music space that don't realize that we've got all these ancient rules. And so there's this kind of chaos in the middle. And, you could say, oh, well, people are manipulating the chaos and taking the value out, and that may or not be the case. But one thing is true is that it's not just a matter in this day and age where technology is leading us to plus 60,000 tracks a day being uploaded to Spotify. We're in a world now that is beyond anybody's, I won't say dreams, but idea of what this industry would be. And the existing rails that we run on are becoming more increasingly unfit for purpose. And that's not a blame thing. I don't blame people. I don't blame, societies and DSPs and people like that. It's just that there has to be a different way. And I don't think it's about being disruptive. I think it's about being additive. So, working with Family and Music, we kind of built this idea of this creator space, this creator accelerator, as I like to call it. And it's where we look at the idea that creators themselves don't even consider themselves to be writers. Most creators create a track, they call themselves a producer, they get a featured singer and they put it up, and then they don't even know they've made a song. They don't even know that they have rights. So there's this growing bubble of people where the industry doesn't work for. And it isn't about shouting and saying it's all wrong. It's about trying to do something additive and positive. And so that's kind of what Family and Music is about. And what we've been working on Magenta is specifically an identifier, or the start of this story from Magenta is that it's an identifier for anybody in the industry, regardless of who you are. You don't have to be a certain size or have published works or even have ambitions of receiving money, because it isn't just about money. It's about having all the options. Most artists say when you interview them, what do you want? And they want to be discovered and known. They don't focus on money yet.
I think this is where the audience net data is interesting for us, because if it's a generation of people who don't assume they've got to be part of the traditional structure, they're going to take a look at a lot of the frameworks and say, well, why would I do it that way, right? That's not necessarily the way you would design things from scratch. So it seems like a great time for people like what you're doing at Family to be in that space of providing capabilities and access to the independent community.
Yeah, we're not saying the industry's wrong. We're trying to add something new to it.
Sure. And I think it's going to always be true, which is we have to keep in mind that artists have their own idea of how they want to spend their time. And for some, it will always make sense for them to let a bigger entity drive most of their career. And then there's going to be artists that say, I'm actually comfortable sitting in the center of it all and pulling the levers. That's been the case for a while. And I think the technology is just allowing us to offer more diversity and maybe more competition around what those tools would be. Thank you for that. Which kind of takes us, Susan, to what you're doing. I must say, as a person who grew up in the major system myself, it's pretty stunning and cool that there's a job like yours inside of a major company. And I wondered, your earlier setup, it was a very attractive element of you taking the job, but maybe you could talk a bit more about the day-to-day. What does that mean when you wake up? What are you doing? Who are you advocating for? What are the kind of things that are on your list?
Okay, well, it's yeah.
And what do you have for breakfast? You can cover it.
What do I have for breakfast and lunch and dinner, right? Exactly. So the overall mission, right? Sony has this mission that we want to do the best for our artists, right? We want to provide them with the best levels of service. We want to make sure we're putting them first and think about how to enhance their experience, as soon as they're a member of the Sony roster, and beyond, right? So hence the creation of this unique role. So the mandate is not only to drive the implementation of artist forward initiatives, for all of its programs, which I'll talk to you about in a second, but honestly, to just constantly think of new ways to support our artists. So, I kind of look at it, since you've grown up in this industry as well, I look at it as the larger record companies are like really well-oiled machines, as far as taking product through the system and achieving results, right? And when I say the system, I mean finding an artist, signing an artist, going through marketing and promotion and sales and, everything else that comes with that. But this role allows someone like myself to step back, and look at the broad picture and focus on the artist in all the aspects of their journey, and I have to say, this has been, such a welcome find, is that, the senior management team is, willing to hear anything and everything in our attempt to, find programs to help the artists. So it's like, what can you think of? What can you think of? So I'm talking to artists, talking to reps, talking to, I'm surrounded by people on the creative side, people on the business side, and just really trying to find out what is needed and trying to figure out ways to put that in place. So back in summer of last year, we launched this Artist Forward program, right? And this is a global initiative, so that's great. It prioritizes transparency and support for all the creators, right? So I look at it as a three-legged stool, if you will. So we have the Legacy Unrecouped Balance program, which I'll talk about. We have real-time tools that we're providing to our artists and creators. And then we have artist assistance, which is sort of a global effort, aimed at promoting wellness and education to our talent. So let me talk a little bit about each of these. So Legacy Unrecouped Balance program, you may have heard about this, right? In June of last year, we launched a program where we basically pay through the earnings to many of our long-standing artists, right, without regard to recoupment status. So we basically, if you recorded music before a certain date, which is 2000, and you've not received an advance, you're eligible to get earnings paid through. So basically, choosing to pay through on artists' unrecouped balances, for those who qualify. So that's the first leg of the stool. So that piece of it has me working with, let's say, royalties departments and things of that nature on a constant basis to make sure that piece is moving forward. We have real-time tools. That's the second leg of the stool, basically. And these are data-driven tools that we've created over the last several years. They've been enhanced, and we're offering them under our sort of real-time tools suite. So this allows artists to be able to see their earnings real time, literally as soon as it's credited, to us. Artists can see the earnings all via, apps. They're able to cash out very easily with a click of a button. They're able to, and this is sort of, I think, an industry first, be able to get draw down on future royalties. So that's something, in case an artist needs some earnings at the moment and, access to their monies right away, they're able to get that. Also, there are some things that are trends where it provides information, data. We saw in the last panel, this is what artists want. They want to be able to understand and know what it is, what's happening on the DSPs, where is their music selling. So some of these tools, again, on an app, click of a button, provide that information to artists to show, earnings, daily, weekly, all-time numbers, playlists, trends, and something that comes under the banner of insights. It allows for artists to sort of have more of a marketing and strategy perspective with, how better to connect with their audience and how better to, sort of connect the dots and plan for that next big moment, with their partner. So that's two legs. And then the last leg is sort of a broader area, which is, and from that second stool, I'm dealing with the digital departments and things to find out what the tools are that they're constantly, creating. But the last leg is the artist assistance program. And that, as I mentioned earlier, is dealing with wellness, dealing with education aspects. So in September of last year, we launched a wellness program, and that allows free, confidential access to global counseling services around the world. There's, hotlines in 70 languages, and the on-roster artists can take advantage of these services. So, and I have to say, when you ask, what is my day? One of the things I'm checking on metrics, again, it's confidential, but to understand that people around the world have been using these services. So again, we're sort of hearing what, our artists and creators have been asking for. In addition, we have some things that are coming. And again, that's part of my day-to-day, working on sort of all of these things, on some enhanced resources, focusing on answering questions about earning statements, payments, how the artist portal works, how the data analytics tools work. We're putting together a global program for newly signed artists to be able to provide them with information about how being a member of the Sony music roster, really is on a day-to-day, and what we can do to help us really be true partners. So it's interesting. We're seeing
That's an evolved major music company you're describing there.
I'm telling you, it is exciting because we're seeing the artist interest. We're seeing them excited and eager to work with someone who wants to put some of these things out there. So
thank you for that. Nadia, I had a follow-up for you. I just wanted to see if you had any stats, and we wanted to talk a bit more, I think, about women in the industry specifically. So would you mind throwing a few more things at the audience in terms of women in the industry? And then Kevin, I have a quick question for you too on the identifier before we run into the topic on the environment, because I want to also open it up to everybody when we get to the topic of the environment. But go ahead, Nadia.
Oh, you're muted.
She's on mute, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah, there you go.
Thanks, Mike. I wanted to talk a little bit about, some of the data that we have out there. I think there's been some extensive research done on women in music by some of the fantastic other organizations that are out there, and some fantastic women in the industry, like Vic Baines Counting the Music Industry, which showed that 19% of rosters in 2019 across labels were female artists, and only 14% signed to music publishers were female musicians. We obviously know there's a number of barriers that affect women in music, whether they're an executive or as a composer. There's obviously a gender pay gap issue across the industry, which I would like to see more action taken by individual organizations in the industry. By female musicians and composers, there's a huge gender pay gap disparity that occurs for composers from PRS for Music stats. The top 10 female songwriters earned 70% less, that's 70% less than the top 10 male songwriters in 2020. And that was 67% less in 2019. So that gap is widening. And then that feeds into less income, less opportunities. And that's why we lose women in the industry. And we really need to focus in on these stats and really take action and do something about it. Women take on more unpaid work. They also have a motherhood penalty. We incorrectly assume a lot of times in the music industry specifically that mothers are less committed to work and not interested in advancing careers. And I think it's also good to highlight some of the biases that exist in the industry. We touched on it earlier, just about, Mike, you mentioned about, hiring biases within organizations, kind of really changing the shape of the senior teams and kind of pushing out the old boys club in a way. Like, a lot of these organizations have pale, male and stale leading them at the top, and we really need to get some diversity in the room, because diversity is also proven to improve business. McKinsey's diversity report showed that companies with more gender diversity in senior executive teams were 21% more likely to be profitable, and those with ethnic and cultural diversity were 33% more likely to be profitable. And not only that, those companies that don't have diversity within their teams of gender, ethnic, cultural are actually hit with a penalty. They're 29% less likely to achieve profitability. So, you know, it's about changing that mindset. And really a lot of the work that I try and do is about creating awareness of these issues and trying to have a wider discussion about it, especially with gatekeepers or people in positions in power that can actually make change.
Please don't stop what you're doing, because that's too important. Kevin, I quick one, because I like to geek out a little bit on the metadata, and as an original DDEX board member, I think about identifiers a lot. Do you see Magenta and the identifier there being targeted more toward the blockchain world, toward DDEX messages, all of the above? Is there an advocacy and socializing component of rolling it out where you want to insert it into some standard messages that exist today? How does that go to market?
Okay.
In 2 minutes or less.
Okay, let me try and do it in 2 minutes. Well, number one, Magenta isn't just an identifier for songwriters, and so we're looking to be a much broader integration. As we go forward, we're going to roll this out across other areas. And in terms of like data transfer, because using blockchain, there are other possibilities around the way that data can be viewed, which give it some advantage over traditional methods. So, for example, without getting over geeky, but by giving people access via a token, people can dip in and use the Explorer to look on the blockchain. You don't necessarily have to. We don't necessarily have to transfer all of this data. The important things about our identifiers is to say that you don't ever have to really show any more information than you need to do. So if you go into a bar and you have to be 18 or 21, there's no reason to show your address, your photograph, and everything. All that identifier has to prove is that you are that person who you would say you are, and you are over 21 or 18. So the identifier has elements where it's designed to travel across multiple places without necessarily becoming embedded and established as an alternative to an IPI number. We see a large part what we're doing is working. Well, a large part we're doing, in fact, all the work that we do is working with people. So we understand that we need to propagate our identifier, and we've already started that progress of propagating it. We also see this identifier in many, specifically when it comes to writers, as almost being a pre-identifier, because we know at the moment existing systems, and we're trying to facilitate change in these big systems, but we know that the mandated policies exist that only money can flow in certain directions to a DSP, to a collection, to a society or a PRO. So there are changes that we are hoping to affect long term, and also we have short term directives. Again, one emphasis: this is not just about creating an identifier so that you can go and collect money. It is partly towards that. It's also about creating an identifier so that you can have a voice. Because if at this moment in time, pretty much, although there are some fixers and fiddlers in the industry, if you don't have an identifier, you don't exist and you don't have a voice. You can go through other channels. So this isn't just about having an identifier to claim money. It's also about everybody having an identifier and a voice and a way of expressing themselves, which is not necessarily just financial.
Excellent, thank you for that. And there's a question in the chat about where Nadia's data came from. Is that US? And Nadia, you're saying, I think it's primarily UK, but the USC Annenberg study out of the US is a pretty good resource as well if people want to see similar stats, right? Excellent. Okay, we're going to take a minute to talk a little bit about what sounds like, based on AudienceNet, the topic that some folks are a little pessimistic about. It was, as they pointed out, the one that folks thought would progress the least or maybe not get better in their lifetime. As an individual who's worked on this topic for decades now, I'm going to encourage everybody not to despair. In fact, when we talk about the history of how the industry established its current environmental footprint, I think it's more so that we can learn from those mistakes, to the extent that we've made mistakes, not to dwell on it. Because if you dwell on and you repent too much, then despair becomes hopelessness and people feel like they can't do anything about it. And that's certainly not where we want to find ourselves. But I do want to frame this discussion a bit with some data, because I know it's hard and we all go with our instincts about what we can do. And this can feel like that existential elephant in the room for many of us. But as an industry, and I'll just give you a scope, the mainstream recorded music industry, so today's streaming centered industry compared to the day that the CD era was there, Today, we are twice as polluting. We generate more than 2 times the greenhouse gas emissions as an industry as we did then. And that's counterintuitive to a lot of folks, because you think about plastic CDs, you think about all the other elements there. And it also is because we've all grown up in an environment digitally where we forget that the cloud is made up of cables and servers and energy generation and a very non-green, non-clean environment, which is why we have to be stewards of even the data utilization in the digital world if we really want to have a positive impact. And with all respect to Hartwig, I think in the interview that was going on between he and Paul, it was asked, should the industry be paying attention to its contribution? That data would suggest we absolutely need to be, because if we've doubled what we're doing, and that's not because of increased consumption, that's because of the framework of the industry today, we have a real responsibility to do that. And if we don't, and certainly artists care about this, and artists have the ability to change consumer behavior, we know that, we've seen that many times in the past. I think it's important for all of us to focus. So let's break it down, because I don't want that number to become too intimidating for folks. Here's one area as an example that we could go after. If you just look at the process of clicking on and listening to a stream, and you break it down into storage, transport, and then the playback side. And the playback being you're on your device or in an environment. The storage part of it, many studies have shown that's in the area of 35 to 40% of the energy generation and consumption, which translates into the greenhouse gas emission. So when you think about the current state of our industry, where we have DSPs all over the world, all of whom have their own data stores, and they're often holding on to the same sound recording base asset as everybody else, right? We've got thousands of replicated assets rather than a central repository where CDNs could all ride on top of and handle that transport. So while I'm not calling that low-hanging fruit, because that's pretty significant in terms of the work that would be required, that's a very specific example of what could be changed structurally in our industry. And that's an example of something that can't be done by one company, right? Right before the holidays, there was a wonderful pact that was announced across the industry, driven by the independent community, and the majors are on board. That really will result, for the most part, because of the way that the methodologies are written, that'll result in people doing good things in their companies. But many of the things that we have to do require the joined up efforts. One other example, and this is the closest I'll come to a plug for MQA's technology today, though I think it's a real example of how technology innovation can lead us to both better experiences and greater stewardship of the environment. Today's typical 192.24 audio file, and we all know that sound quality has been a conversation for the last 12 to 24 months across all the major streaming services. In fact, there's now a competition among that. But the typical 192.24 file in its full form is 20% music information and 80% waste. It's actually empty, the storage of that real estate. So we have a huge container, which is that file, that results in delivering a relatively small footprint of information. And what MQA has focused on doing, as an example, is zeroing in specifically on that musical information and giving you back better resolution on a significantly smaller footprint. In fact, it's 5 times smaller than that typical file if you streamed it without our technology applied. So as we start to think about major music services upgrading the quality of the audio, we have to think about how that audio should move around to consumers, and how do you get better quality on a much smaller footprint. I won't go on about that, but if you want to read more and learn more specifically, mqa.co.uk/sustainable tech will talk to you about operational and sustainability benefits of ours and other technologies that we all should be discussing. Okay, so this is one of those, enough about me, let's talk about you. What do you think of me, right? But let's get back at it. I'm be interested if, and Kevin and Nadia, if you guys have given thought about this one as well, what are some of the things that come to mind for you when you look at the industry's impact on the environment, and perhaps what could be done differently, particularly in light of the fact that the lockdown has all taught us or forced us to do things differently. And we should at least give some thought to the next time we get back on a plane or go in a car or do those things that we've shown that we can live without. There are trade-offs, of course, but we've shown that the industry can actually thrive in many ways doing things differently. So Nadia, what comes to mind to you?
Yeah, first of all, I thought, what you said about kind of collaborating and kind of sharing information, I think that's what I would have given as an answer in terms of what the industry should be doing. You know, you mentioned the Music Climate Pact. That was something that was led on by AIM with BPI, and obviously why that pact was unique in was that it aligned both majors and independent companies to talk about and address, you know, the environmental impacts in a collaborative way. And I think that's really the importance, and that's really the issues and how we're going to actually tackle it moving forward. You know, we need to kind of accept that it's a major issue, and we have that commitment now. You know, there's a musicclimatepact.com. You can go and check the companies that have signed up to it already, which include Sony Music, Universal, Warner, Ninja Tune, Secretly, BMG, Beggars Group. And there's a pact to kind of, you know, mitigating our contribution to global climate change. And we have that social responsibility. So I was positively kind of thinking that actually we're, you know, looking to kind of actually target and tackle climate change with this pact. So I think it's a really positive step forward in the industry. And I think collaboration is key to that.
It really is. And we need to find those entities that can join us up across companies. Kevin, did you want to throw any thoughts on this?
Yeah, be very brief. Well, three things. One is it's not a plug for our technology at all, but our part of what we're doing with Magenta is obviously blockchain based. So one of the things there that we moved a million miles away was from the traditional idea of proof of work and into proof of stake. So there are colossal changes being made, and I know it's a bit like comparing apples to bananas in from a technological and a point of view. But so people in Bitcoin and crypto and blockchain have found ways of working which are thousands of times more energy efficient. The second thing is we're at Family Music. We are actually going forwards, and we've not announced it, and this isn't an announcement, but we've been spending a lot of time talking with Brian Eno and Earth%. So we will be making some announcements about what we're doing there, specifically to do with our identifier in that case. But I think also one of the things that I think that we can do, and we were almost guilty of this, we were going to do a songwriting camp in Lapland and fly a load of people in to go to a songwriting camp. And we thought, you know what, why don't we do, with all the great companies in Finland who are building all this new technology, why don't we build virtual collaboration camps that are VR and AR? And then we don't have to fly people who've got big publishers and who can spend a lot of money. We can collaborate. Anybody can collaborate from any country, any color, whether you're in a wheelchair, in a hut, as long as you can get a decent connection. Obviously, I'm going to rule out the fact that you might have to wear $250 worth of headset, but we'll get around that eventually. But I really like the idea of people collaborating without having to go and using the best in technology to make it a fantastic experience. So I think that there are things that we can do, but please don't stop bands touring live. They can get there's lots of people working on that to help solve that, and with local equipment and stuff and resources. But
yeah, that's a worthwhile mention there. I'm fortunate early in the Warner environmental days to have worked with Adam Gardner and Lauren Sullivan, who founded Reverb. And just I think in June of this year, they just announced a great music initiative similar to the pact that's going to impact live to another level with some of the biggest artists in the world that are part of that. So I think there's been great progress in the live space for quite some time. I think Reverb itself came together in 2004 and 5 and has been doing that. And on the recorded music side, clearly we have some work to do. But I'm inspired and grateful that all three of you joined, because really smart people are working on really big issues. And thanks for that. I look forward to staying in touch with all of you. And with that, Paul, I think we'll turn it back over to all of you. Where are they? There they are.
Here we are. Lovely. Thank you very much, Mike, and all the panelists for a great ending to that track on the values-based music economy. That was really, really interesting.